everyone. Welcome to the February 19th President's Day weekend edition of the Timeform US Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, Timeform US analyst, and I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski, the Timeform US chief figure maker. On the past this week, there are a bunch of stakes races happening all around the country. We're going to take it venue by venue and look at the major stakes races that were happening in clusters at Fairgrounds, Oaklawn Park, Laurel, as well as in California and Florida, and just kind of take a look at the races because a lot were run at similar distances. We can make comparisons and look at the speed figures for the races and differences in pace. And we'll also touch upon all of the horses that participated in the Derby preps this weekend because there were a lot scattered around the country and some lesser races, as well as some horses that participated in maiden and allowance races that we'll cover all of it on the podcast this week. So without further ado, I'll welcome in Craig Milkowski and my co-host. Craig, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, much better than last week. So hopefully I sound a little better voice-wise. I feel great and ready to go.
Awesome. As we discussed on Twitter, I think we're going to dive right in and talk about some of the speed figures for the Fairgrounds races. But before we talk about the actual races, I briefly touch upon pace and how pace impacts speed figures. And obviously, when we're making the Timeform US speed figures, as you do, they're pace-based speed figures, which is the major difference between Timeform US speed figures and the Beyer speed figures. But can you talk a little bit about how pace impacts speed figures and kind of what your philosophy is on how you handle races that feature extremely slow paces, sort of like the Mineshaft handicap that took place at the Fairgrounds on Saturday? Because I know there was some consternation over the Beyer speed figure for that race being higher than the 3-year-old races, even though the time for that race was slower. So just talk a little bit about the philosophy of why that might happen.
Well, for us, like you said, we definitely use pace in our figures. And a lot of people get the impression that we just reward fast paces, but we also do a little bit of the opposite. We at times can penalize a slow pace, but we also have the latitude to kind of upgrade a race when the pace is so slow that it's just ridiculous. And that's what happened in the Mineshaft. I mean, when the figure first came up on the screen, the first fraction, I think it was almost a 26, if memory serves. You know, I looked and I said, this can't be right. But then when you watch the race, you know, you kind of look and you see those horses weren't being asked much at all. And I did go, as I often do on these races, and I timed it from video, and there was no problem at all. I didn't really think there would be, but, you know, it's all good. And, you know, it was just a race that it was so slow that it had an effect on the final time for sure. And in these cases, what we like to do, and I really don't see any benefit to us, you know, assigning the race a rating based purely on the final time. You know, in this case, I think the Mineshaft would have gotten about a 95, which is a mid-price claiming race figure. I don't think it's representative of the ability of the horses. And you know, we have that latitude where we can give the race that notation to say, hey, this figure was altered because of the pace. We put a P right there in the race rating so everybody can see it. In this case, you'll see all the fractions in blue. So I think it just gives a better picture. And we even recommend, we have a page where we talk about all those codes for the speed figures that we use from time to time. I think maybe 10% of the races, that's just going off the top of my head, might have them. And one of the things we say on the P is this is a race probably best avoided as a one to use for speed figure analysis.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic to kind of dive into a little bit because, you know, people like to use examples like this to kind of tear down speed figures in general, or, you know, make the point that, oh, it's someone's opinion. They're just deciding that these horses are faster or slower than they actually ran, which it's not the case. You know, you're trying to put forth a speed figure that makes sense so that there's actually, you know, utility for the handicapper when they look back and are viewing these races in retrospect and handicapping how the horse is going to do next time out. It's not really serving the horse player if we're telling people that, you know, the horses in the Mineshaft that the winner ran, a 95, because like you were saying, that's the kind of number that claimers would get. Now, some people would say just give the horses the figures that they actually ran and don't like tinker around with this. And, I understand the thought process behind that. I mean, some people might even argue that this was a less taxing race for these horses because they ended up going so slowly and they just kind of, walked along on the front end and then sprinted late, kind of like they do in a turf race. So maybe there's the argument that horses that set faster paces actually exert more energy. That's, I think, a valid thing to consider. But, most people aren't going to be doing like a deep dive like that. And they just look at a speed figure and know how well the horse ran. And I think we have to, kind of upgrade these figures to give a representation of how they ran in relation to their competition, because that's ultimately how speed figures are used, kind of comparing horse to horse, their class, their speed. And I think by upgrading the figure as we did and as Beyer did, I think that helps handicappers make those determinations moving forward. The other thing I want to mention about slow-paced races is how it kind of distorts figures for other horses in the race. And it's kind of, you're damned if you do or damned if you don't with this, because if you give it the lower figure, the figure is probably going to be more correct for the last few horses that crossed the finish line, because, they just kind of trailed along at the back of the pack and probably ran as fast as they could run. Whereas when you upgrade the figure, to give it the winner, the figure that he really, would be expected to run in that situation, it kind of lifts up the horses that finished at the back of the pack more so, because think about a turf race. Horses set very slow fractions. They come to the top of the stretch and the entire field just sprints the final quarter mile. So horses are crossing the line, with some run left in the tank, even the horses, at the back of the pack. So there's only so much distance that the leaders can put between them and the horses that are overmatched. So the same applies to this Mineshaft handicap. The horses that, finish towards the back of the pack, they probably didn't finish as far behind as they would have if the pace had been faster.
Right, exactly. And it's obviously much more rare that this happens in a dirt race. The races are usually run differently, but in effect, this was run like a turf race. And it does happen from time to time. And, it's something in our case, we can get away with it a little bit more without drawing too much ire from the Twitterverse and things like that, because we do still penalize for the slow pace. And just a quick look at our chart, and you can see almost all the horses in the Mineshaft pretty much regressed off of what they have run before. But we're still giving the horses kind of a representative figure of what we think happened. And another part of the reason why we do it, we have other issues that this can affect, things like our pace projector and things like our power picks. Will be greatly affected if I were to say Silver Dust ran a 95. It's going to affect him in his next pace projector. It's going to affect things like the power picks. So there are other reasons why we do this as well. It's not just that we don't think these horses can run, slow races, because they obviously can, but there's reasons for it, and there's reasons why we do the things that we do.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand people that, want to explore, what the alternatives are in these situations. But I think you do have to kind of weigh the pros and the cons. And, I think kind of as we, elaborate on that, you can kind of see why these decisions get made the way that they are, and why we almost always, upgrade these speed figures to be at the level that they should be at. So hopefully that was a little bit enlightening, because I know there was some confusion around that and why speed figure makers make those decisions. So kind of transitioning directly into the fairgrounds races to discuss the major dirt races that took place. Before we get to the Mineshaft, let's just start with the 3-year-old races and focus first on the Risen Star, because, War of Will won this race, and I thought it was just kind of a fascinating race from a pace perspective, because the pace didn't seem to be, that fast. I mean, it's not like he set a much faster pace than Serengeti Empress did in the Rachel Alexandra, but from a visual standpoint, this race just completely fell apart behind the winner.
Yeah, other than the winner, it did. I mean, the next 4 finishers, I think, were the last 4 early in the race. Country House and Royland, the very green Country House, I'll add. We do have the quarter mile and the half mile coded in red as a fast pace. We gave War of Will War of Will a bit of an upgrade from his 107 final time figure to a 110 overall. He did it from the 14 post. We'll talk about the Southwest later because I saw a lot of people immediately jumping on the War of Will bandwagon, and the Southwest actually got a bigger figure. Some people were surprised that I had that way. But, this was just a decent race. It's basically the same figure he ran in the Lecomte. It's nothing that jumps out at you as saying this is a Kentucky Derby horse numerically. Visually, I can see why some people think that. But, sometimes those worlds clash, and that's when it gets interesting.
Yeah, as a trip handicapper, this is the kind of race that I really like to focus on because I get the speed figures lower, and he didn't run any faster than he did in the Lecomte the prior time. But just from a dynamics perspective, he ran so much better War of Will than the other speed horses in this race. To me, it's significant because the pace was moderate in the Lecomte, and he beat horses like Maniwa and the other horses that were closer to the pace by a decent margin. But I mean, those horses, they came up totally empty at the top of the stretch in this race, and War of Will still had plenty left. And I liked the way that he finished. I mean, it's not like Country House, while he was green, he wasn't getting to him at all at the end of that race. I'm becoming a fan of this horse, War of Will. I know he's got to run some faster speed figures, but he's got all of this stamina breeding on the bottom side of his pedigree. Sadler's Wells. He's a half to this horse, Tacticus, who won a 1 3/4 race up at Saratoga a few years back. I just feel like this is a horse that does have the potential to keep getting better. He's always been good, but I mean, this was just his second dirt race, and I like what I've seen out of him so far, though I realize he does have to get better. Country House, I was hopeful that he'd kind of be able to take that step forward. He ran quite well in this race. He just, got to lugging in the stretch. I mean, he already has blinkers on, so I don't know what Bill Mott's going to do with him. But I still think he's got some ability. He just kind of has to figure things out.
Yeah, I agree. He was never beating War Will. And just to talk about that one a little more, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think despite the similar figures, I think it was a much better effort than we saw in the Lecomte. I'm a guy, even though as a speed figure maker, I'm not somebody who's going to, just bet top figure horses. I always like to say the speed figure should provide some perspective to the race, not define it. And I think that's what we saw with War of Will. This was no easy trip by any means. Like I said, the pace was quick. He had a wide post. He still finished strong. So, definitely a big effort. And anytime you see all the rest of the field just fall apart, and we're not talking about 1,000,000-to-1 shots. We're talking about horses who took some money in here and who were bet and respected coming in. And just packed it in while this horse kept going. I think he's one to watch. I assume he's going to go in the Louisiana Derby, and maybe we'll see a little bit more from him figure-wise, which I'd like to see. I'm not going to bet a horse in the Derby if he runs another 110, no matter what the trip looks like. But this is the kind of trip where it wouldn't surprise me if he jumped up to a 120 next time. He's probably got that in him.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because I kind of agree. He's a horse that does still have that potential. And speaking of the pace of the Risen Star, I think it's good to immediately contrast it with the pace of the Rachel Alexandra, because as you were saying, the pace of the Risen Star was color-coded red. It was fast, and the pace of the Rachel Alexandra was not fast. But it's not like there was a huge difference between the two paces. But just from the visual perspective, how the horses were doing it, I mean, Serengeti Empress, that was just a walk in the park for her because she's a pretty fast filly. She's won sprint races on the lead. And I mean, as soon as she got to the front and kind of pricked her ears and just looked like she was loping along out there, you basically knew this race was over, and she kicked for home pretty impressively in the stretch.
Yeah, she did. And like you said, it's not coded red like the other race. I'm sure it was close. I mean, we have to have the cutoff somewhere, and this one didn't quite make it. But she was clear, and clear to me is always good. Obviously, you can go too fast even when you're clear, but when horses run without pressure, uncontested, it's not quite as impressive as when they're battling on the quicker fractions. But you can't really knock this performance. I mean, she won. She ran almost as fast as the Colts did at every call. It was a little bit slower, but she got a 109 as opposed to a 110 there, and it was certainly a nice rebound from the Breeders' Cup for her.
Yeah, I mean, the main question for her moving forward is is she going to get this setup every time? Because she's obviously been, very good when she can control the pace and sort of relax on the front end. Even when she's going fast, she's the kind of horse with a lot of speed that just has this high cruising speed where she can, shut down and set some fast fractions, take the other horses off the bridle and still finish. We haven't seen her do it from off the pace or even stalking another horse. And there are other speed horses pointed at Kentucky Oaks, so I think that's going to be the major question for her. But when she gets this kind of pace scenario, she's very dangerous. The mine shaft is a tricky race to analyze, as we were discussing with the pace scenario of being so slow, and the entire field being pretty bunched. Some horses had trips in there. The winner, Silver Dust, he's kind of a funny horse. In some ways, I think that the way that the race played out and the fact that the pace was so slow kind of allowed him to use his speed and kind of take the race over at the top of the stretch with that turn of foot that he has. Because I'm not sure how far this horse really wants to go. He's kind of an in-betweener. He's like a one-turn miler, a horse that can get a mile and a 16th. And I think the way this race played out really played to his advantage.
Yeah, I'm a guy who tends to think these really slow-paced dirt races don't favor front runners at all. We see that a lot of times. People think, oh, they can get away to a slow, easy lead, and to my eyes, 8 times out of 10, all that happens is you let the closers in the race, and they're able to just outkick you through the lane. And I think that's what happened here. You shorten the length of the race, basically. I mean, this is a mile and a 16th on paper. It was probably more like a 7 furlong race the way it was run. They just kind of trotted around for a little bit, and then the real racing began. So, this is one where, like I mentioned, I'm not going to put a whole lot of stock in any figures from this, be it pace or speed figures. I'm just going to look at it more as like which horses held their form, which are maybe going out of form. It's hard to flame away off this effort, even coming off the layoff. That he seemingly didn't have much left, even though he did still manage to finish third. But, otherwise, I'm just going to kind of put a line through this race when I see these horses come back.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I mean, I was kind of sad to read after the race that Harlan Punch came out of it with a minor injury, and I think that's probably a career-ending injury for him. I've always been a fan of that horse when he was with David Jacobson, but I mean, he ran well and through some trouble in the first turn. The horse that people might want out of this race, and rightly so, is a Lone Sailor, because this race was just one you can draw a line through for him. I mean, he was at the back of the pack the entire way, which is not where you want to be behind a very slow pace. And they tried to rally up the inside in the stretch through traffic. That's just never going to work in this situation. So I think for Lone Sailor, he got a tightener in, but this race was just kind of like a workout. Just view it as, next time out, assess him on his prior efforts, not this race.
Yeah, that's one of the underrated things about these trips for closers in these races. It's not just that the horses up near the front have more left. It's that, then you have to navigate traffic because the fields tend to be tightly bunched. There's nowhere to go. So you either go wide or you get stuck in traffic. And 9 times out of 10, you're just not going to get through. And it's going to be an ugly looking running line. And that's what we see with Lone Sailor. I'm trying to remember. Harlan Punch actually ran very well. Like you said, it's tough break that he got injured. He kind of worked out a trip there, but yeah, just an ugly race for a figure guy.
Yeah, totally. For there was some turf racing on Saturday at the fairgrounds, but I think the one that we have to discuss is Synchrony in the fairgrounds handicap, because he's just a really solid horse. When he gets the right trip, he's very dangerous. He's never quite proven that he's really grade 1 quality, but in these grade 2, grade 3 stakes races, I mean, he just always comes with that late run, that finishing kick, and he was just too good for these horses.
He was, and like you said, he's failed a few times when he stepped up against the bigger boys, but when he doesn't, when he's in these races, it's always whether the pace is slow, the pace is fast, he always seems to get it done. The pace in this case we had rated definitely fast. Most of the fractions are in red. The best front run, the only horse that was near the front was the leader, who finished 4th. The top 3 all came from further back. I thought the 11 Bandua, he ran a nice race. He actually gets a point higher figure in here. He was up close to the pace. He was a little bit wide throughout, and he still had a decent finish. Is he better than Synchrony? I don't know. Could he beat him with a better trip? I guess it's possible. So they're probably the only 2 I'd want out of here.
Yeah, I wanted to mention Bandua as well because, I mean, he did make that first move into the pace. And I think you do want to note that when you've got a fast paced situation and horses are just, on the turf, you want the horse to make the last move as Synchrony did. But Bandua kind of took the race over and broke it open coming to the top of the stretch. He's a funny horse because they had kind of tried him in some ridiculous spots last year. I mean, I think he ran in the Irish Derby in just, his third career start. They brought him over here. I think they originally talked about running him in like the Belmont Stakes after that. And they tried like the Secretariat, the Canadian International, just some really tough spots for a lightly raced 3-year-old. And it looks like they kind of backed off a little bit and targeted a race where he fits better. And he was a big price in this race, but he showed that, he rewarded his connections' faith in him because he ran really well in this race. I'm not going to be surprised if he turns out to be okay. But obviously Synchrony is, the classy runner in this race. So, I mean, we'll see if he can step up to grade one foes moving forward because he's had some trouble doing it in the past. That's the fairgrounds action from Saturday. Fast forwarding to Monday at Oaklawn Park, we had another trio of stakes races on the dirt to discuss. We'll start with the Derby Prep, the Southwest. Super Steed winning this race at, I believe, 62-1. Watching this race, I've watched it back a few times. It's just kind of a weird race. The whole field was pretty bunched, even though it seemed like the pace was pretty honest. And then Super Steed just kind of took it over and caught everyone by surprise. And it was just a weird run to the finish because, nobody could catch this horse, even though he made that premature move.
Yeah, like you said, it was a weird race. When I was watching live, I thought the same as you did. I said, wow, this must be a pretty slow pace looking how bunched up all the horses were. And it turns out it was nothing special numerically. It wasn't fast. It wasn't slow. It just kind of was an average pace. He did make that big, wide premature move. He got a little tired late, I think. 62-1, was he impossible to come up with? Probably not, but it's hard to make a case for him. You can always make a case going backwards, but I'm sure if a couple people had him, not many, obviously. I couldn't come up with him. I do a little write-up for the Derby countdown thing that DRF provides, and I said, kind of look for the closers, but he wasn't one that I picked out in here. I just couldn't get to him off of that Southwest race. I was more on Bankit, who basically did nothing, just kind of floated around the track and passed a few horses. And, he got a 112 for the win. I guess it's good. He had run a 96 his last couple of times out. It's a good jump. That's not uncommon at all with 3-year-olds. I got some questions on Twitter about how could this race be faster than War of Will, who was so much better. I think we both agree he could have, he's got more in the tank. I'm not sure Super Steed does. It's just hard to say at this point. Not a numerically huge race again. We haven't really seen that from any of our 3-year-olds yet so far this year. So it'll be interesting to see these guys going on. I'm sure some of these will show up in the Rebel. A few more maybe will scatter out a little bit, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I really don't know what to make of the winner moving forward. I was surprised he got the distance, kind of looking at his pedigree. I really thought there was more sprint on the dam side, and he had kind of shown that in his prior races. His only big win prior to this had come in the slop. I don't know where it came from. I thought he was pretty hard to make, but he got the job done. The horse that I think we do have to mention is Long Range Toddy, because he got a pretty tough trip, just kind of the wrong trip for the situation because horses were making outside moves coming to the top of the stretch. The leaders were tiring inside, and he just unfortunately got caught in behind the two early leaders that were stopping at the top of the stretch. I mean, he probably lost a good 5 lengths of momentum coming to the top of the stretch. And I would imagine, given how strongly he was finishing in the final 8th, that he would have won this race if he had gotten out at the right time. He's really the only horse that ran well in the Smarty Jones that came back and ran well in this race as well, in a race that was just kind of marred by inconsistent form of all the runners. He's probably the one you want moving forward if you want any of these horses, but I'm just not sure how strong this race really was.
Yeah, he's one at this rate. He's probably going to wind up in the Derby gate. He keeps picking up points. He won the Springboard Mile here at Remington. He seems to be the redheaded stepchild of the Asmussen barn. He never gets bet, and he keeps beating all the other ones. And he did it again, like you said, with the best trip. I think it's the 3rd race in a row he's run with just, several Asmussen horses entered, and he keeps winning them. So I guess when those horses show up, you got to at least look at him first going forward.
Yeah. Two other stakes that were run at the same distance as the Southwest were the Razorback and the Bayakoa for older horses, the former for Colts and the latter for fillies. Coal Front was able to get the job done in the Razorback from post 14. It's actually funny. The first two finishers in this race were actually stretching out in distance for the first time. I mean, you rarely see that in major stakes for older horses. Usually younger horses are doing that. I thought Coal Front was pretty impressive. I doubted him going in. I thought this was a really weird spot for Pletcher to enter him in. I was kind of even surprised that Pletcher bothered to ship him after the post position draw because he was just mired all the way on the outside. But they came out running. John Velasquez was really aggressive. And I thought this horse was pretty game in the last eighth of a mile to fend off the runner-up for Steve Asmussen, Coppertown, or I forgot his name now, Copper something. Copper Bullet, that's right. One of those copper horses. He got a perfect trip, and I thought Coal Front was pretty game to hold that runner off in the final eighth. I don't know if I really want him moving forward. I don't know if this was a really strong field overall, but within the context of the race, you can't deny that he ran well.
No, I think it's a credit you're going to see at Oaklawn. The purses are just too hard to ignore. I think that's why Coal Front was probably in here. I mean, $500,000 to race against this group. I saw maiden races are going for $93,000. So, they're definitely going to draw shippers for races like this. I assume a lot of these will run back in the Oaklawn handicap. There may be one in the interim I'm forgetting. I'll have to think about that between the Razorback and the Oaklawn handicap, but
like the Essex or something. Yeah.
Nah, there is the Essex, but I don't think that's the one I'm thinking of. Anyway, we'll get back. It'll come to me. It's probably a half hour from now. It'll come to me, and I'll say it. But yeah, Coal Front, he was good. The pace was pretty quick. We didn't code it in red, even though the fractions were fast in the 140s for the opening quarter, which he had to do from that 14 post. The 10 horse kind of gunned out of there, but he did get good position, and like you said, it looked like the one was going to nail him late, Copper Bullet, but he was able to hold him off. The 119, it's nothing to write home about, in my opinion. It's kind of what he is, a low 120s, high teens horse. So I'm not sure how he's going to handle a step up in class. But if you want to give some extra credit for the trip, maybe he's getting a little bit better and could move up a little bit. I don't think he's going to be the answer to our older horse problem this year, but I'm sure he's going to win some money for his connections.
Yeah, I agree. I've never been a big fan of this horse. I'll give him the credit for winning this race, but I'm not sure he's one that I really want moving forward. A horse that I am interested in moving forward is the winner of the Bayakoa, She's a Julie. Now, on the surface of things, she got a much easier trip than Coal Front did. I mean, she kind of broke on top in a race that did not feature a ton of pace. I don't think it was color-coded blue in RPPs, but it definitely was not a fast pace. I liked how good this filly got last summer. I thought she ran a deceptively strong race in the Alabama, and I was pleased to see her come back on her 4-year-old debut and sort of, handle this field fairly easily. She's a filly that I'd be interested to see kind of stretching out even further in distance moving forward, because I know Monomoy Girl's going to be coming back, and she's not really like a mile and an eighth, mile and a quarter type of horse. I don't think they're going to target races like the Delaware Handicap with her. And She's a Julie is one of these horses that I think has a ton of stamina and she can carry her speed. And I'd be interested to see if they target some of those races with her.
Yeah, I agree. And she's another one. She's run here at Remington, so I've seen her in person. And she's definitely a good horse. And kind of relating, we haven't mentioned it. We talked about the 112 that was won in this given to the Southwest winner. And just looking at the times, you can see where that figure came from. I mean, She's a Julie. She's a pretty established filly who's run some nice figures in the past, and she was only about a half second faster than the Southwest, and very similar with the Razorback. And just to get this off my plate, the Razorback actually used to be run on Rebel Day. It's been moved up, so I guess they've juggled the stakes calendar around a little bit. I think the Essex is the one being run on Rebel Day or around that time, so there is no other big one. That's a $300,000 race, so I'm sure some of those will show up. But anyway, like I said, from a speed figure perspective, She's a Julie. She ran a big race. It was a 117, which for fillies and mares, that's a solid grade 3 figure. Wouldn't surprise me if she can jump up a little bit. I don't think she's grade 1 material, but Asmussen certainly knows where to place his horses. He ships them where they need to be. He'll show up in New Mexico. He'll show up at Lone Star, Oaklawn, Remington. So I'm sure he's going to do very well with this filly. He is the master of picking these spots, if you ask me.
Yeah, I've always kind of liked this filly's pedigree. One of the reasons that I kind of latched on to her dam sire's Dubai Millennium. I always like to see Dubai Millennium in these pedigrees because he only had that one crop, and it's just cool to see him still, relevant as a dam sire. But speaking of pedigrees and speaking of horses that are really bred to run long, let's give a quick pop to two impressive winners outside of Stakes Company at Oaklawn Park from the past weekend. On Monday, Intrepid Heart was a horse that was talked about for Todd Pletcher, who came in to contest a 1 mile maiden race. Was very well bet, and visually, he was pretty impressive. The race didn't come up that fast, but I mean, this horse is bred to run all day. He's a half to commissioner who was second in the Belmont Stakes. He's even that Vino Rosso and So Alive family. I mean, these are horses that want to run, a mile and a quarter, a mile and a half. So I mean, that's one of the reasons people are so excited about this horse, but. I thought he did it well. He's going to have to run a little bit faster in the future.
He is. It's kind of crazy to think about, but at this point, he might be Todd Pletcher's best Derby hope.
It's crazy, I know.
I was actually looking through the point standings. I think he only has 2 horses that even have points, and those are 2 points and 1 point. So, this horse might be heading the stable right now, even with, 103. He did it so easy first time out. We talked about thinking a horse can run faster, and, sometimes we over-exaggerate that. I don't think there's any doubt this horse can probably go faster next out, especially with a little more distance, a little more pressure. Like you said, the breeding certainly is there, so he will be one to follow. I'll be curious where he shows up. Much like Steve Asmussen, Todd Pletcher can send horses anywhere and everywhere. So it's hard to say where they're going to show up, but he's definitely one I've added to my stable mail.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was writing in my analysis of the Southwest that the only graded stakes winner on dirt that Todd Pletcher's had from this entire crop of 3-year-olds is Sambier, all the way back in the Sanford at Saratoga last summer. It's just kind of amazing that Todd Pletcher has gotten to mid-February of a crop of horses of the next year, and he just doesn't have any graded stakes winners outside of that one sprint winner. Pretty unusual. The other horse to mention from, I believe it was Sunday, a filly, Motion to Motion, won an allowance race with a 1:16 time formula speed figure. Pretty impressive for horses at this time of year, especially in a division where we've got some horses that have been impressive but haven't run that fast yet, like a Serengeti Empress. If this filly can repeat that performance against Graded Stakes Company, she's going to be a major player in this division.
Yeah, this was one I definitely wanted to talk about. It jumped off the page when I did my worksheet to make the figures for Sunday. The Oaklawn Day was really consistent from the first race through the last from a speed perspective. And this one just jumped out. I had to go and check it. I went and timed it just to be sure, because we do have several of the horses in here jumping up several points, as many as 10 and 15 points. But that's not unusual for 3-year-old fillies, and I'm never afraid to rate the race by the clock, especially with these younger horses, because big jumps are not uncommon at all. And when all the other races tell you what the track speed should be before and after this one, it's really hard to knock. And when you watch her visually, she just looked really good. She looked really fast. She was under control. She wasn't running off. And I was really blown away with this race. And like you said, the speed figure, it stacks right up there with horses who are pointing to the Oaks. So I assume we're going to see her in stakes competition sooner rather than later.
Yeah, you kind of knew something big was coming when you're watching the race at the 3/8 pole, when you've got, all the horses behind her off the bridle chasing, and she's just going pretty easily. This was her first time stretching out, and she just really loved the extra distance. I believe she's by Take Charge Indy, and I think the dam is actually a full sister to the dam of Shared Account, who won the Breeders' Cup filly and mare Turf. So, I mean, it's no surprise that she improved going longer, but it'll be interesting to see if she can repeat this performance against tougher company. The other track that ran a bunch of stakes races on Saturday was Laurel Park. They had some sprint races, a bunch of races around one turn. The General George and the Barbara Fritchie were the two headline attractions. Starting with the General George, I believe this was the highest time from a speed figure of the entire weekend, actually. Uncontested, I think, on a 129. This horse was just 0.11 seconds off the track record. I mean, it was a fast day at Laurel, but I mean, this horse ran fast early, ran fast late, and he's always had ability. He's always shown potential, but it seems like he's finally putting it all together for new trainer Jennifer Patterson.
Yeah, this was in fact the fastest of the weekend. I think it edged out Synchrony at the fairgrounds, and it was a huge performance. Like you said, he ran fast early, he ran fast late, he faced pressure, and then when you look at the second through fifth finishers early, they were 12th, 5th, 10th, and 11th. So, you know, all the other speed horses who were in there just were nowhere to be found at the end. It was just a big number, that 129. That's a grade 1 type number. We don't have a lot of grade 1 sprints in this country, particularly at this time of year. But I think we have the Carter coming up at Aqueduct in probably early April. So, you know, maybe that's a target. But I'd love to see this horse pointed to some of them. Because other than Roy H., given how Imperial Hint ran, which we'll talk about a little later, I don't know what else is out there in the sprint division to be afraid of.
No, I completely agree. And, you know, it's funny. This horse, I think he was with Wayne Catalano prior to this. It kind of seemed like his career was over. I mean, he had shown some precocity early. He had run in some Derby preps, but he just hadn't got on. They had turned him back in distance, and he was, you know, he was good one day, you know, not good the next. But this new trainer, Jennifer Patterson, seems to be getting the best out of him. I was reading this was her first stakes win. I think she's actually a former assistant to Shug McGahee. So, I mean, no surprise that she knows what she's doing. And yeah, I was impressed by him. I agree. I think he'd be a perfect fit for a race like the Carter. So hopefully he stays sound and we see him in races like that because this was a pretty strong performance, much faster than the filly division of this race, Barbara Fritchie, though this was probably the feel-good story of the weekend, Late Night Powwow, winning her 11th race in 12 career starts, her 9th race in a row, a West Virginia bred from Charlestown who just seems to keep stepping up to the plate and getting it done.
Yeah, she does. And like you said, it is a feel-good story. A lot of my racing roots come from Charlestown, where I used to do double headers with my friend Larry Comas and another friend, Ken Beck, from high school. We would hit the Maryland track and then drive immediately to Charlestown and spend the night there betting on horses. Oftentimes when we weren't old enough to be betting on horses, but that's another story for another day. But I always have a soft spot for these Charlestown horses. Unfortunately, she's one that I just keep betting against, and it just never works out because she just keeps winning. You know, she doesn't run particularly fast. She just runs fast enough to win. And, you know, the 113 here, it kind of helps explain that 129 that we gave to the winner of the General George, along with the other races. Like you say, it was a really easy speed figure day at Laurel that day. But, you know, she's just as game as she come. If I remember, she's a little filly. She almost looks like the other horses are just going to envelop her, but she has that fight, and which is it's hard to define numerically, but when you see it, it's always a fun thing.
Yeah, she reminds me of that horse, Dance to Bristol, that won a bunch of races in a row a few years back in this division, kind of from a smaller circuit, just a tiny little filly that's able to step up and gut out these victories. You know, the pace of this race wasn't that fast. I mean, there's no comparison between the pace of this race and the pace of the General George. I would assume this one was almost color-coded blue because I think the speed figures actually came down a little bit off the raw final time figures. But no, this is one of the rare examples of a horse who had been really visually impressive out of town. And when they stepped her up against tougher horses, she actually did step up herself and run faster. You know, we talked about a horse like Global Campaign last weekend, and you know, Late Night Powwow is really the exception to the rule because more often than not, these horses that are so visually impressive against lesser company, you know, they face real horses and they can't do it again. But I mean, she just keeps getting better. So, you know, she deserves all the credit. The one other horse I do want to mention out of this race is Dawn the Destroyer. I'd been a fan of her prior in her races at Aqueduct. I thought she had really gotten good for Kieran McLaughlin. And the one thing I'd mentioned, I think on our first podcast, is that she really needs to run outside of horses. In her last win at Aqueduct, she just was going nowhere inside, had to swing out. And finally, you know, when she got into the clear, she made her run. She was just inside for her entire trip. And I mean, that was kind of dictated by her post position. But she just was always inside for this race. And she actually closed okay to be third. But for me, I'd want to bet her out of this race, if anybody.
Yeah, you kind of stole my thunder where I was going to steal your thunder and mention that trip with Dawn the Destroyer. Because watching the race, I remembered our first pace cast and you saying how she really needed to be outside of horses. And, I was surprised Alvarado is her normal rider. I'm sure he knows that, but sometimes things just don't work out. She was drawn towards the inside, and I imagine it was just kind of tough to get out without losing a whole lot of position.
Yeah, I would assume that's just what happened. But I mean, she is a horse that I would look for next time because I really do think that makes a big difference for her. The one other race from Laurel to mention is probably just to touch upon a 3-year-old, Always Mining. His major claim to fame, I think, is that he's the only horse to ever beat Win Win Win, who was so impressive winning a race at Tampa Bay Downs back in January. He got a pretty soft pace scenario in this race, Always Mining, but he's a horse who's run a lot of times, but just seems to keep getting better. I don't know where he goes from here, but I thought he was, impressive from a visual standpoint.
Yeah, he was. And I mean, hey, he ran a 108. I think it's his third 108 in a row, which, it's not mind blowing, but it's not too far off the Derby preps we've already talked about. Not sure what the plans are with him. He did it easy. His final time was a 111. We do knock it down a little bit for the pace, as we mentioned earlier. And, I'm curious to see where this one shows up. He definitely needs to face some tougher competition than what he saw here before we can get a really good read on him.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sticking with the sprint division for a sec, one of the most anticipated races, I think, heading into last weekend was going to be the Santa Monica at Santa Anita on Saturday. Looked like a loaded field, a bunch of top horses from last year in the sprint division, also horses turning back in distance. It just was a really intriguing group of runners. Had a couple of scratches in the race. And just the way it kind of played out for me, this race turned out to be a big letdown because just turns out horses like Selcourt, horses like Paradise Woods are probably not what they once were. And Marley's Freedom, she's just, rock solid and she keeps showing up. And, I don't think this was her best effort ever, but she got the job done and she was there to take advantage.
Yeah, I thought her and Selcourt ran well. Marley's Freedom was clearly the better horse. Not a whole lot to take out of the rest of them other than Paradise Woods. She's looked done for a while. I think this is probably the exclamation point. I'd be hard pressed to ever bet her in a race going forward, but somehow she keeps getting bet, so maybe you can get some value if she runs. I'm not sure what the plans are on her. Probably a little too short for Mopatism, but she's not a grade 2 filly really, in my opinion anyway. So, kind of played out the way we suspected. Marley's Freedom was 3-5. She won easy. She's got a 117 speed figure. This is a case where we give Selcourt a little higher figure due to the fast pace and her setting it. But when you have a clear, easy lead like that, I don't put a whole lot of stock into that 2-point higher figure. Marley's Freedom was able to run her down easily, and I think she was clearly best.
Yeah, I thought Selcourt kind of had the race won at the top of the stretch, and she just kind of couldn't seal the deal. I don't know if 7 furlongs is, a little far for her these days, but I was a little disappointed with the way she finished off the race. The horse that, was kind of fancied going in and didn't show up at all is Escape Clause. I don't really know why they turned her back in distance. To me, I mean, she wants to go longer. I'd even want to see her going as far as 1.1 miles, 1.25 miles on the dirt. I think that's more her game. But she just couldn't keep up with these horses early, was wide, and just really had no punch. So for me, I'd draw a line through the race. I don't really know where she's going from here, but this was just not the right spot for her. On Monday at Santa Anita, we saw another 3-year-old that was very impressive against not the strongest competition, but suddenly he's appearing on a bunch of people's Derby lists. Galilean, who won the California Cup Derby. He looked great doing it. The horses behind him are probably destined for maiden claiming company, claiming company, because they've broken their maidens, most of them.
Right. And I mean, it is a cowbred race. I don't have an exact figure for this. My assistant, who's based in Southern California, does the figures for Santa Anita. But just looking at the worksheet, I would roughly give it a 108. It might come out a couple points higher, maybe a point lower. But, I have a hard time with it. This horse doesn't look like a Derby horse to me. Like you said, he wasn't beating a whole lot. I know he was 1-9, so I mean it was pretty obvious to everybody. But and I could be wrong. Maybe he's trying to follow the California Chrome path, but that's a pretty ambitious path to think every Calbred that dominates a division is going to be California Chrome. I personally don't see it with this one. California Chrome was a faster horse. Good luck to him, but I'll be betting against him and hoping he takes a lot of money.
Yeah, maybe he is the California bred version of like a late night powwow who just can keep getting better. But I mean, as we were saying, she's kind of the exception to the rule. And usually horses like this, when they're coming off such easy wins, and they're not running much faster than the horses who are doing it against graded stakes types, often they have trouble and they struggle when they try to step up in class. I mean, he's got some pedigree. He's actually a son of Uncle Mo, which is unusual for a California bred. But yeah, I'm not really buying it. I want to see more out of this horse moving forward. We'll head down to Florida for a couple of races. There was one major stakes on Saturday. It was the Royal Delta. Appropriate to see Bill Mott win the Royal Delta with Blamed, who's a solid filly. And, it really just confirms that I think the sloppy track did her in last time in the Hurricane Birdie when she put in an uncharacteristically poor performance, because she got right back on track here and, she looked okay winning the race.
Yeah, she did. She won easy. I thought she was a little bit over bet, but I couldn't find anybody to bet against her, so I just kind of watched as a spectator. She ran that nice 123 back at, I think it was Aqueduct in November on Thanksgiving weekend. That was a track we had coded as bright red as speed favoring, so I think she might have got a little boost from that. And this is probably a little bit more representative performance from her, the 114 she got here. It was only a mile, the one-turn mile at Gulfstream. It was the only one run on the day, so I'm not rock solid on this figure. I mean, if you want to tell me it was a 118, I could buy that. But, it's tough sometimes. You got to use the data that you have, and that's what I did with her, kind of looking at the horses running behind her. I saw the horse, I guess, from the Kukulkan, or whether the horse from Mexico who ran in the Pegasus. I probably butchered the name.
Hala.
Yeah, Hala Hala. She was certainly a surprise. I guess she did take some money, but she ran a nice race to be second. But, not blown away. This was a so grade 3 in my opinion. That's probably about what we're going to get from Blamed in the future. Don't think she's a whole lot better than that unless she gets things her way like she did at Aqueduct. But, solid race, nothing to get too excited about for me.
Yeah, I kind of agree. A race that people might want to get excited about is, I think it was the third race early in the day on Saturday. There was a 7-furlong maiden event for 3-year-olds, and Chancelot won for Jorge Navarro. Didn't take any money. I think he was 12-1. But this horse looks really fast, and he ran a very fast final time, a 120 time formula speed figure. There are a lot of first-time starters in the race, so you want to be a little careful with numbers like this. But, it checks out compared to the other races on the day. And this horse looks like he could be an impressive one moving forward. And there are other horses in this race with some ability, too.
Yeah, this one scares me a little bit. When I do a number like this, I go back and check it, 3 or 4 times, kind of like with Justify last year, though his was off the charts. But, when you look at the other races around it, there's really no other answer than to give the figure that it was deserved, which came out to be a 120 here. Boat Express ran well to be second. He was beaten just a neck. And if you look, he came out of the, I'm going to forget his name now, the Mott horse. Hidden Scroll, yeah. He came out of that race where he ran a 98 that day and jumped up a 115. So maybe this bodes well for that one going forward, too. Not that he needs a whole lot of pumping up. He's got plenty of cheerleaders already. But definitely going to be watching this race as a figure maker and as a fan, because it definitely came up fast. Some good performance. The top 4 all ran really strong races according to our figures.
Yeah, anybody who wanted confirmation that Hidden Scroll is a pretty special horse, I think they got exactly what they were looking for with the first horse to run back out of this race. a 17-point speed figure improvement for Bodie Express. That's pretty significant. Fort Worth was the Pletcher horse that was the heavy favorite in this race. He just got eliminated at the start, kind of rushed up to chase Chancelot after that. That's just the toughest trip imaginable for a first-time starter. He hung on to be third. I think his speed figure was like a 110, finishing about, 4 or 5 lengths behind Chancelot. He ran okay. He's a horse that's probably going to do better next time out with a more professional start. But I'm not going to be surprised if we see a bunch of horses do well out of this race because, like you were saying, you have to be wary of these races when they're all first-time starters, or a lot of them are. but I mean, it seemed pretty fast, and it looked good from a visuals perspective as well.
Right. It's definitely one I went back in time from video, which I can easily do for Gulfstream races because they put them all on YouTube, and it checked out right to the hundredth of a second. So no problems on the time or anything like that. So that was definitely part of why I gave the figure that I did. And you know, as you said, I'm a little leery because there was trouble to see Fort Worth run a 110 with the trouble he had is a little bit, you know, hard to take, but you know, I'm going with it, and we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see moving forward if these horses really are that good, and kind of hope they are, because that would be exciting to have some fast 3-year-old sprinters like that. Moving on to 3 more races to quickly discuss from other venues. The final major 3-year-old race of the weekend was the El Camino Real Derby at Golden Gate. I'm not sure if this race is really going to have much of an impact on the Derby picture as a whole, because it's run over the synthetic surface there. And the winner, Another Twist of Fate, he was very impressive and he got a respectable speed figure. But, you know, looking at this horse's pedigree and the way he runs, it's just all turf.
Yeah, it is. And I can't take this race seriously as a Derby prep. I guess being a Stronach track, the winner gets a free ride to the Preakness. I'm not even sure they'll take him up on it. Who knows? I don't know what their connections are thinking here, but you know, good race as far as synthetic. Sometimes that translates to turf, sometimes not. I imagine they're probably going to give him another shot on dirt, but he didn't run very well at all on it first time out. Can't blame him for taking a shot, but he's not a horse I'd be interested in as a horse on the Triple Crown Trail.
No, I agree. I believe he's a son of Scat Daddy. I know they can be versatile at times, but on the dam side, I mean, it's just all turf breeding. His second dam won, I think, the Buena Vista agreed to a turf race, and she's produced 3 graded stakes winners on turf, including Nebraska Tornado, who was a multiple Group 1 winner in France. I mean, it's all really strong Juddmonte turf breeding for this horse. So, and just kind of the way he moves, he's got that turfy stride to him. So, I mean, I think he's actually got some ability. He seems pretty good. That turn of foot that he showed at the top of the stretch was very impressive, but I think they should be targeting races like maybe the new Turf Triple Crown Series at NYRA, because you know there's a lot of money out there for a good turf horse. There's no need to kind of try to put this horse in the Derby trail if he's not going to be successful.
Yeah, I'm not knocking the effort at all. I mean, you don't often see horses draw off in synthetic track routes like this very often, but you do got to keep in mind the horse, the second choice in the betting, and the horse that finished second was Kingly, who's probably about an 8th string Bob Baffert horse that he sent down. So, you know, I'm just going to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. The big disappointment of the weekend, just in terms of, you know, popular top horses that were in action, was Imperial Hint, who just didn't show up. I mean, he wasn't the same Imperial Hint in the Pelican Stakes at Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday. They're offering up an excuse afterwards that he had a minor foot ailment, or he came up with that the next morning. But you know, for a horse that's been solid for so long and just always seems to show up, he just didn't look like himself in this race. And Killybegs Captain, who I know quite well from following the New York circuit, I mean, he's nothing special, but I mean, he looked pretty special in this race just because nobody else showed up.
Yeah, the rest of the field wasn't much. I'm surprised Imperial Hint was 1-5 and not 1-9 against this group, to be honest. But yeah, he just at no point did he look like he was winning the race when I watched it live on TVG, and you know, he just looked bad. I was surprised he held third, to be honest, but that just is more of a testament that to what the rest of the field was than what he ran, because he was just a shell of himself. And to be honest, he really hasn't run a big race since last summer. He won that race. I think we talked about it where he probably could, or maybe you mentioned it on Twitter, a horse that could have run faster in one of his wins. Yes, that was at Saratoga, I believe, or was that at
Belmont, his final part for the Breeders'
right.
Cup, yeah.
Right after, that's right. Yeah, right at the end of September. But, you know, he hasn't run well. He ran third in the Breeders' Cup without getting a particularly good figure. He only ran a 118 that day. And this is just another bit of a regression. So, you know, maybe they can get him back on track, but he's not a young horse anymore. And from a betting perspective, you know, if they keep on with him until he proves me different, I'm going to be against him.
Yeah, I was interested to see if maybe the pace would be color-coded red. Maybe it was extremely fast because the runner-up did basically come from another zip code to get up for second. I mean, that horse was like 20 lengths back early, and he's not very good. So, the pace definitely helped him a little bit. It wasn't an extremely fast pace. Killybegs Captain went a solid clip, and he held on. But yeah, it's hard to spin this in any positive way for Imperial Hint. He's hopefully can rebound from this because I've been a fan of this horse. He's a cool horse. He's just this tiny little thing who's so fast. But yeah, you don't want to see them go wrong like this. Staying with the sprinters, the last race we're going to discuss very quickly, since I follow the NYRA circuit, the race that I was most impressed with at Aqueduct last weekend was the Holly Hughes on Monday. Bavaro, who was stepping up first off the claim for Linda Rice, coming out of a pair of $25,000 claiming wins, right up into New York Bred Stakes Company. And I don't think the speed figure, which was fast, I don't think it tells the whole story with this performance.
No, I mean, this was definitely a big race. The horses he beat had been in pretty decent form, especially I Love Lulu. And, it's just when you see a horse claimed by Linda Rice out of that claimer, and to be surprised, I was surprised. I think it was Jeremiah Englehart had this horse, that he actually ran him back in a second claimer off his big win the time before that. Almost begging to lose the horse. But when Rice takes a horse and steps him up in class like this, it's almost always a sign the horse is going to run big. And that's what he did here. And I like that he was able to sit off the pace a bit. He's mostly ran wire to wire in his wins, if memory serves. And it was just a big number and a big effort for him. The 124, that could win a lot of stakes races around the country, including New York.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if this horse can kind of keep it together because, I mean, he showed a ton of potential when he debuted as a 2-year-old. I believe at Aqueduct, he won a fast maiden race, and then he came back and won this minor New York Bred Stakes race against 2-year-olds with this crazy fast time. I mean, I think the speed figure could have even been, a lot faster than what you or Beyer gave it, just like an unreasonably fast time. And he was riding a gold rail that day, but I mean, still, this horse ran a gigantic effort for a 2-year-old. And then ever since then, it's like he just went wrong. He just couldn't get back to it. He refound his form in some cheaper races more recently, and he was able to duplicate that effort against tougher company this time. Despite not getting the lead, he's always been a need the lead type, and I thought he was finished when he broke slowly, but Junior Alvarado just kind of eased him up into the race the way you want to do after a horse breaks slowly, not panicking, and he took it over and just didn't look back. I was impressed. We'll see if he keeps it together because he's been a little inconsistent in the past against tough horses. No, I hope Linda Rice can keep him on the right track because he could be an exciting New York bred and go on to some bigger things.
Yeah, definitely could. I'm always a big fan of these horses that kind of have a resurgence, especially when they drop down in the claimer. So, I'll be a fan of his for sure. I love speed horses, and I like these old, hard to believe I'm already, time flies, calling him an old warrior, because I remember those 2-year-old races you mentioned. It seems like they were just yesterday. Hard to believe he's run so many times already. And just, I was really impressed with coming from a little bit off the pace, and that's always a sign a horse is really getting it together for me.
Well, before we wrap up, since we covered so many races this weekend, was there any one race that really stood out for you as the most impressive performance of the weekend, or a horse that you're just really excited about?
It's kind of funny. The one horse I forgot to mention that I wanted to talk about came from Santa Anita on Saturday, I believe it was, and it was a turf sprint that was changed from 6.5 down the hill to 5 because the course was wet and they don't like to run down the hill for safety reasons. But I've always known Belvoir Bay. She's a really cool horse, really good turf sprinter, but she just blew me away. I wasn't expecting that kind of display of speed from her, cutting back to 5, and she just absolutely toyed with those horses, ran a big 122 Timeform US speed figure. She's proven down the hill. She's proven to be able to beat boys. So obviously it's way early in the year to talk about this too much, but she's a horse I won't be surprised at all if she shows up in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. And she's just a really fun horse that I like to follow.
Yeah, I saw that race. She's run mostly out in California, right?
Yes.
I'm not super familiar with her, but that race, she was very impressive that day, and that new 5 furlong configuration at Santa Anita. I mean, she, ran a pretty fast time on it right off the bat. So she is one to follow moving forward because, there can be a lot of movement in that turf sprint division. The horses that are running in the lesser races, seems like they can pretty easily step up to the grade 1 races because they're all just so fast.
Right. Yeah, it just takes getting hot, and the trips are always important. But she's been a solid sprinter for a long time. But I just the 5 furlongs I thought might be an issue for her. There were some faster on paper sprinters, but she just toyed with them. So she's older. I think she's 6 or 7 by now, if memory serves. But man, she was good. She was really good. How about you? Anything that really? What was your most impressive one?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with War of Will. I know the speed figure wasn't that fast, but just, when I see a race unfold like that and I see him just be, a total pace outlier in the way that the race finishes, I have to give that race extra credit. I liked that performance. I'm going to be very interested to see if he can make that speed figure jump that we were talking about, because I think next time out is the time that he really has to do it. It's got to happen before the Kentucky Derby because he has not run that fast race yet. But I liked what I saw from him at the fairgrounds on Saturday, and it'll just be interesting to see if he can keep moving forward. Because all of the 3-year-olds that we saw this weekend, outside of maybe Motion in that allowance race, they've all got to run a little bit faster. And I think that's kind of been the theme among the 3-year-olds that we've seen so far in January and February. Some decent performances, but nothing that kind of bowls you over, nothing that makes you go, wow, I just saw the Derby winner. There are a lot of horses that still have to return, but we've got to start seeing some horses run faster races.
Yeah, one of the things as just a bettor, I don't think a lot of people talk about enough. There's no value in big figures going forward. The value is in predicting the big figures that are coming. And I think speed figures do a good job. They can kind of point at which horses are maybe going to get faster and which are tailing off. But, if you're looking just to bet big figures, you're probably going to be in the poorhouse pretty quick. You got to look for those horses that are improving, and you got to catch on before the public does. And War of Will could very well be one of those horses.
Yeah, I mean, as a handicapper, we're always looking for any edge we can get. And for me, just closely watching races, I think that gives you an edge. So it's something that's always worth doing. Craig, it was great talking about all these races this weekend. I think we covered a lot of ground today. And looking forward, I'll be interested to see if any of these horses can step up in the major 3-year-old races, or any of these older horses like She's a Julie or Coal Front can continue to win tougher grade 2 and grade 1 stakes moving forward. So we'll do it again next week. Craig, see you then.
All right. Sounds great, David. Talk next week.
Yep. And you can listen to this podcast every week. Every Tuesday it'll be out on drf.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or SoundCloud. So just search for Daily Racing Form, Timeform US Pacecast, and come back and hear us again. Thanks, guys.